Welcome to Environmental Fridays. It is Personal, Season 2. You can learn more about our topics and speakers by joining our Environmental Fridays Facebook group. This series is brought to you by Best Early, the Benton Spirit Community Newspaper, Andrews University Community Engagement Council, GC Scored, Every Piece Matters. Introducing your host, Dr. Desmond Hartwell Murray, and this week's co-host, Nick Gunn. This week on Environmental Fridays, we'll be hearing from Don Johnson.
All right, so welcome again to Environmental Fridays, Season 2. It is personal, and today, again, we want to have you directed to our website where you could find a lot more information about Environmental Fridays, www.theenvironmentalfridays.com. And today, I'm going to start with recognizing that today is, in fact, Earth Day 2022. And text from scripture that sort of captures this and gives this perspective, a bigger perspective, is found in Psalms 24:1. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. I have a short video about Earth Day that we'll play now on YouTube. Okay, so we are glad that you all in attendance here are chosen to start off Earth Day 2020 with us at Environmental Fridays. We get back here. There's another video that I want us to look at. It's 5 minutes or so. And this deals with one of the major global problems that affects different parts of the world differently. It's the problem of water scarcity. And in this 4 to 5 minute video, you'll see that that is a very personal, in line with our tagline. It is very personal. So I'm going to play that for us at this point.
मतलब कि पानी हर पब्लिक का सुविधा मिला है, सबका आराम रहा है। हम तो अपार का आराम चाहे थे, लेकिन तुम्हारा तो कोनो दिक्कत में हम लोग के पीछे तो बर्बाद हो, हैं?
I'm a BBC journalist and I live in California.
I'm a BBC journalist and I live in Delhi.
It's dry in my state.
It's dry in many states in India.
It's the driest it's been in California in 165 years of recorded history.
Well, India has seen more than 40 severe droughts in the last 200 years alone.
In Los Angeles, if I go out to eat with my friends, I have to request a glass of water. I'm not automatically just served it.
Well, those in central India have to walk for miles to get their glass of water.
इनके दिक्कत क्या हुई है? मेरी शादी हो गई है, लगभग 15 साल हो गए। तो जब से मैं आई हूँ तो मतलब मुझसे बर्तन रखता नहीं बनता है सिर में। जो सिर में रखी बर्तन तो मेरा सिर दर्द करने लगता है, हाथ पांव भी दर्द करते हैं पानी उठाने से, चल के ले जाने। अब बार भी मतलब डब्बा उठाए से इधर उधर किए से पूरे एकदम छोटे पड़ गए हैं। और कभी गांव के पास एक कुएं है तो उससे लाते थे पीने उन्हें के लाने, तो वो सूख गया है, उसमें एक भी पानी नहीं है। अब यहाँ से ले जाते हैं, नहीं हर काम इससे करते हैं, तो बस इसी इस्तेमाल इसी तरह करते हैं जैसे नहाते हैं।
अब हमको क्या पता, माँ बाप शादी करें, अब हम क्या जाने कि पानी का प्रॉब्लम है कि नहीं है। बस यही है, 5 किलोमीटर है, पानी लेके आते हैं, जाते हैं, सुबह ले जाते हैं और फिर शाम के जब चुक जाता शाम के लेने आते हैं।
तो कौन लड़की अपनी दी, और वो तो देगा जब सब कुछ होगा कि लड़की मेरी परेशान न हो, भूखा न मरे, उसका प्रतिपाल हो। अब यहाँ पानी का एक बूंद आदमी कलप रहा है। जमीन 4 इंच बाद पत्थर है, वहाँ खेती सूख जाती है।
और आप में से कौन है जो जिनकी शादी नहीं हो पाई है इस समस्या की वजह से? प्रमोद जी हैं, और कौन है?
100% में सोचिए कि 80% ऐसे हैं जो बगैर शादी के पड़े हुए हैं। हम सब नौजवान आपस में मिलकर के बात करते हैं कि ये समस्या कैसे दूर किया जाए, तो अब उतने पढ़े लिखे भी मैडम नहीं हैं कि हम लोग सक्षम हैं, तो हम हर अधिकारियों से जाकर के बात करें, अपनी समस्या ले जाएं। बॉम्बे जाते हैं हम लोग, वहाँ पर ये जो भैंसें हैं इनको वहाँ भूसा चारा खिलाते हैं। फिर वहाँ से घर के लिए दिल किया, यहाँ भी देखना पड़ता है, माँ है बाप है बूढ़े बूढ़े, उनको भी देखना है। यहाँ पानी की समस्या है, वो दूर से पानी नहीं ला पाते हैं। सर झगड़ा हो जाता है पानी में। अब जैसे भरने गए पानी नहीं है और एक साथ लोग पानी भरने लगे तो उसमें बवाल पड़ जाता है।
लेकिन यदि आज के आवेश में जो सरकार वहाँ से सुविधा देती है हम लोगों को, वो सुविधा यहाँ कर्मचारी अधिकारियों के द्वारा सब खा जाती, हमको कुछ नहीं मिलता।
यही बात आती है कि मेरे नसीब में ये लोग झूठ बोल के यहाँ ले आए हैं।
ये अकेलापन महसूस होता है हमको भी लगता है हम भी शादी करवाएं, हमारी जीवनी आगे के लिए बढ़े।
लेकिन जब ये पानी का समस्या देख लिए तो फिर कहते हैं कि बहना आप वहाँ शादी मत कराइए।
Yeah, so environmental issues are very personal. And this is another example of that. That video, of course, again, could be found on YouTube if you want to take a look at it later on again. Coming up next week, we will have, our topic will be premise plumbing. And we'll find out what premise plumbing means and the waterborne pathogens that are found in premise plumbing. Our speaker will be Joseph Falkenham III. So that's what's coming up next week. This week's topic is finding environmental solutions, and you will hear from our speaker here shortly. Today, my co-host is Nicholas Gunn. He's an 18-year-old graduating senior at Berrien Springs High School. He plans to attend Andrews University in the fall and major in social studies or political science. He is the current Mr. Benton Harbor, and he'll be competing. Is it this weekend? I think it's this weekend coming up for Mr. Blossom Time. He's very engaged. He's very busy. One of the things that I know he's involved in is with the Benton Spirit Community newspaper. He's a writer and a member of the Benton Harbor Team Solutions. He's also an editor of his own YouTube channel where he focuses on highlighting local businesses in the Michiana area. He's captain of his school's Black Student Association, member of the Student Council, 3-year member of the Business Professionals of America organization. He started his own after-school Bible study with now over 120 members and counting. Nick is doing stuff. He is very busy, and that augurs well for our future to have young people, young men like Nick. So you will hear from him here pretty soon. In fact, Nick.
Yep.
Oh, you, all right. I think I'm gonna just go to you introducing our speaker right now. Yeah, let's do that.
All right, sounds good. It's good to be with you guys here on today. We have our speaker here today, Ms. Dewan Johnson. She has spent over 20 years working in local communities on health, livelihood, and environmental improvement. She served for 2 years in Costa Rica with farmers who invented new farming tools and tested soils and with water conservation technologies and techniques. She then served for 19 years at the HAS in the Artibonite region of Haiti, supporting local technicians, healthcare workers as they strove to improve their health and quality of life. Dewan investigated, proposed new technologies and extension programs, which helped decide when HAS would start using refrigerators and rapid testing in the health clinics, and generally served as the bridge person between foreign people who said, I have a great idea, and Haitians who said, does it really work? She has been a Rhetorian for over 20 years, getting to know and enjoy other communities, active people in Haiti and the Caribbean, and helping when some Rhetorians say, I have a great idea. She now lives in the Cincinnati area where she grew up with her dog, Roxy. She is a grant manager supporting the team of Haitians and Americans at Restrict Freedom, who are working to end child servitude in Haiti. So thank you for being here.
Okay, I'll stop sharing. And you could go ahead and share.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you much for having me. Sure. And thank you for that intro.
Yes.
So I'm going to be talking on finding environmental. I'm going to focus a bit on latrines, but this is based on my about 20 years of experience in Haiti and other places. And what's behind actually applying the science. So first I give a shout out. Come on. First, a shout out to my bosses at Restavec Freedom. And you can find out more about us at our website at restavecfreedom.org or on Facebook and Twitter. We are a group that is of mostly Haitians and some American support personnel who are trying to end childhood de facto slavery in Haiti. It's called Restavec. And rather than take too much time now, I'll let you find out more about it from looking us up on the web. But we deal with a lot of the same issues of if you're wanting people to change culture, change behavior, how do you go about doing that in a way that sticks? And how do you go about respecting them as people rather than just coming in as we know better than you and you should not be doing that, and all those kind of issues. It's a very different but related to environment, because a lot of it is actually driven by the environmental lack of water, lack of sanitation, the sheer amount of drudge work that it takes to just run a household in Haiti is part of what drives people to need somebody else around the house. Even the moms, like the moms in India carry water, the moms in Haiti have so much else they have to do that they need someone else to carry the water. So they're taking in children from impoverished families, and the kid becomes the one who carries the 40-pound buckets of water on their head and all that. So it all gets linked. It's all personal. But for today, I'm going to focus on latrines, but the focus of my talk will be a little different from what we've tended to do in Environmental Fridays. It's less about presenting scientific studies with statistics and all the things about the numbers behind why an environmental problem exists and what we can do about it and why we're convinced that it works, that the solution works. This is going to be more about how we use the results of all that scientific work, plus other knowledge that isn't easily captured by the scientific process as universities know it, to actually take what they tell us and make change happen in a way that is respectful. So I'm trying to follow the guiding question in this talk of what if Haitians told me that I should tell outsiders? So the big question that drives adoption rates, or just drives people thinking that we actually have an idea they want to use in their own personal lives, if you want to put it in a more user-focused phrasing, is what is good change and who gets to define it? We people who want to come in as outsiders and help out tend to come in with some ideas on things that should be changed, and we've been convinced, so we are in effect defining a lot of what we're asking people to do before we meet them. Lots of outsiders come to Haiti with the thing that will save Haiti, and they found some water cleaning process or some way of doing latrines, and they're like, that seems to solve their problem. This is the magic silver bullet. I got to come in and extend it. And they come in as evangelism for their whichever thing that they has gotten their fancy. And there may be a lot of good science behind it. Peter and I have done a lot of work in Haiti trying to come up with options for purifying water that better suited people's needs. But usually the said thing that will save Haiti gets disappointing results when you actually put it in the field, or it's an outright flop. And for most people, most of the time that come in with a great idea, it flops because it's something that the Haitians could have told them about if they just listened to their advice, which is often phrased in Haitian polite, which means indirect speech. They don't come out and tell you that'll never work. They kind of indirectly say, well, that might be a good idea. And they'll indirectly mention, we have other things we have to be concerned about, or that latrine's done that way because of, they'll phrase it in a way that an outsider might not recognize, but that someone who's gotten used to the culture realizes is their way of telling you there's a problem here that I'm not going to talk to an outsider about, but there is a deal breaker thing that needs to be dealt with. So if the actual users don't see your innovation as fitting into their complete life, all the things they have to do and into their paradigms, they're just not going to use it for long. And then people are like, why do those stupid Haitians not filter their water? Or why are they not chlorinating? Or why are they not this and that? Well, it's usually not stupidity. It's because it's not fitting somewhere that it needs to fit in order for people to feel that this can be part of my life. And this should be the priority in my life. And to be honest, when it gets to which problem should be addressed, what's the key problem, we all tend to ID problems based on what we ourselves have the capacity to address. Most development people in Haiti do not go into an area, you know, if you've studied water and sanitation, you don't go into an area where the key problem might be something social, like all the men have gone to town and there's only women in this town. You might, if you think that their problem is the women don't have a place to get water, you're not likely to even go to that town if you think the main problem is just that there needs to be a local job creation program, unless you actually are running a job creation program. We're drawn to the biggest thing we think we can address. It might be health specialists go to a town where they think there's a health problem that can be solved. Agro-environment people go to a place where they think there's an agricultural problem that can be solved. A general place-based organization like Hôpital Albert Schweitzer started in health and then saw that a lot of people were repeat visitors because they had bad water. And so it developed a water and sanitation program to address that problem, the root cause. But even in our project, we tended to focus on things where we had a department that could address it, and that's natural. We often choose another site for us to go work in, and we might ask another agency to go back to the community that we visited first and see if they can help with the problem that seems to be there. But a lot of folks will do that and they'll say, yes, you know, they'll go in and say, I'm the person from the water group, and ask a bunch of questions about water provision. If they see the real problem is that there ain't no school for the kids to go to, they'll say, oh, yes, that we see that your water's about taken care of, and we'll think about it. And then we might ask somebody else, a school group, hey, you know, look at this village, it's really their problem. But we don't necessarily tell people, yeah, you know, you're right, your biggest problem is that your kids have no place to go to school, so you're sending them off in Restavec. And that's a legit problem. I wish I could do something more about it, but I just don't have any funding or any way of helping you get to school. I will take you to visit somebody who maybe can, but you have correctly, you know, kudos to you for naming that that's the big problem and not the water problem. We tend to always, a lot of people, and I've seen this in Haitians and foreigners, tend to always want to preserve that aspect of we are the knowledgeable, capable experts. And we don't ever admit that, you know, this problem really is something that's got us beat, or we just can't go there. And sometimes that's the correct call. Mission creep is real, and we fight it at Restavec Freedom. There's all kinds of needs, primary needs in there's no school, or there's no jobs for people who earn money to pay school fees, or all these other things that cause families to say the only way I can educate my child or feed them is to send them into Restavec. But we can't solve all of Haiti's problems which feed in. So we have to be careful that we don't take on so many varied and different things that we lose our focus on helping children who are in Restavec survive it, get out of it, and helping families not need it in the first place. We have to worry about mission creep, and that's correct. But you just have to admit it to the people that you're going and visiting and working with, and work with them more as equals and not just as hiding that, you know, their problem is beyond you. And why do we have to do that? In part because we're asking for money and help, just like the Haitian communities that called us in. We're beggars as much as they are in the NGO world, and we need to admit that. And we even need to admit it to the community, saying, yeah, I got to go beg to find you help for that. And nobody listens to me about schools because my organization is known for wells and water. I'm going to have to get you connected and try to help them get connected. I mean, in Haiti, it's not like you're making people will expect you to see it. It's a very patron-driven system. Like if the patron adopts your part of the people that they look after, then the patron is supposed to find a way to meet all my needs. And you don't want to get into that problem. But Haitians do understand that nobody can do everything. And so you just talk to them as equals and say, yeah, you're right. The thing you've named as the primary problem is your primary problem to attack. And that's just not something I can help you with. But kudos to you for knowing yourself. So you have to be willing to say, you have a really good point. I just can't address it. I'll ask around, but I can't promise you I can find someone who can help you with that. And that sense of mutual and not one up, one down analysis and negotiation is something that Haitians consistently say they expect from foreigners who they don't expect to be bon Dieu God, but please at least treat us like we're adults and that you are morals. And then you get into communities may indeed define problems very differently from outside helpers. And I'll use a US analogy that I think most of you will recognize in getting at that. A classic case might be, say you're going into the west end of Cincinnati or something, an economically not very developed part of my hometown. And one group of people goes in and sees the West End's biggest problem as they need economic development in this area because they don't have full employment. People need a way to earn a living so that they can pay for their own needs and pay their taxes and be good contributing members of society and feel that they're covering their own responsibilities. And so we should do job development here. Another group comes down and says, sees in the same community, same situation, says, this is the edge of a brownfield. They've still got lead contamination in soil from when leaded gas was around. They've still got all these problems that are basically a contaminated environment that messes with their health so that they can't work. And what they need first is help dealing with the environmental degradation that the rest of the city has put on them. And then there's about this time, another group, often people of color, chip in with a third approach. And they say, we've been shut out of all the discussions of the whole region in both economic gain and environmental protection, and we haven't been part of this table or this discussion yet. So what we first need is social justice to get us that voice at the table for you two other groups to start listening to what we say. Now, if an outsider comes in to do community development, where are they naturally going to gravitate to? And which of these three groups are they naturally going to want to listen to a bit more? The outsider is going to be influenced by which paradigm out of these three or more the said outsider is already bringing with them. And you need to recognize that. You come in with a bias. It may be a bias toward water and sanitation. It may be a bias toward people need to motivate themselves to get up and take charge of their environment and not be passive, whatever God sends me. Whatever bias you're bringing, that's what you're naturally going to see first. Mm-hmm. And we've got to be very careful as development people with all of our scientific studies, and we collected the papers that are in our field, and we read the journals that are kind of the ones that appeal to us most. And so we come in with scientific data, but it's a curated portion of data out there. And we come in already with some expectations of what I can do and what I'm interested in doing. And we better have explicitly named to ourselves what those are and be ready for maybe the local community sees things a different way. Mm-hmm. So paradigms count. Who gets to define the problem? The served, the experts, or both? My experience has been usually you need both. But you need to understand how paradigms of approaching and analyzing problems work in the developing world, in the traditional world. Haitians may see a problem's cause, the root cause, as being bad morals. They may see that it's a spiritual thing. The Loa are causing us trouble for some reason, and we need to deal with them being unhappy. Or they may, like most of the Westerners coming in, define it as a problem of cause and effect, that germs are getting into the water supply and then the water's not being purified enough to keep the germs from making people sick. There's all kinds of different paradigms that are around in Haiti, and they cause people to maybe have a completely different paradigm of how logic or the social order or the natural world even operates, where scientific types tend to be very focused on the physical causes and effects of what's going on, with maybe a nod to social causes as a quasi-physical cause and effect type thing. But these two ways of approaching things can result in a huge difference, not only in defining the solution to a problem, but in defining the exact problem or key blockage to attack. If you think your neighbor is trying to send a law against you, and it's an acute problem because you've got a conflict with that neighbor, you're going to make a different decision about personal security and how that is affected by how you manage your water and sanitation than if you are just looking at germ theory. And the example in sanitation, germ theory or visible logic, or both. Patients and outsiders who are steeped in germ theory have a paradigm and a solution set. We're trained from toddlerhood that to see feces as inherently spreading these invisible, very, very tiny living pathogens that if they get inside you, they will breed, they will multiply, they will eventually overcome your immune system and you will get sick. And so the way to control, the big thing in sanitation is to not let the germs, even invisibly, get into an environment where they can infect you. And the solution is drilled into us from toddlerhood. You have to isolate feces from people. You have to isolate feces from the environment. You wash your hands a lot. You use latrines. And you do not poop in public. That is very out of it. No, pooping in the publicly accessible environment like open defecation, that is just disaster waiting to happen. That's programmed into us from toddlerhood, literally, if you've ever potty trained a child. And that's germ theory. But especially in rural areas, people have grown up from toddlerhood with a different paradigm that I often call visible logic. They haven't necessarily been steeped in all the ways that you don't necessarily see. So it's very cause and effect driven, like science, but it's a different set of, I can see it acting, I can use my 5 senses without microscopes and stuff to observe. I do one thing and another thing happens. And I can see a connection directly between the thing I do or the thing somebody does and the result. And if I can see that connection, it's real. And if I don't see a connection, things seem to be fine, well, maybe I don't have to worry about that. Remember, the Chinese, who didn't have germ theory, who were very visible logic people, they invented. People can be very good inventors and have sophisticated societies and just be working on visible logic. And then, frankly, part of visible logic is also this whole idea of the spiritual, and that was all worked out. That spiritual view in Haiti was worked out through basically what people felt was cause and effect. And you ignore it in working with rural communities at your peril because it's very real for them.
Hi, Dawn.
Hello.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, my internet just went out.
Okay.
I'm
So-
trying to figure out how to get it back up.
Okay. So are you guys hearing my conversation with Dawn?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Maybe, I know you may have slides, but maybe one of the things we could do if we can't get you back online is you can speak through my phone.
Okay, we may have to do that.
Okay.
And this is classic in Haiti, things going
Yes.
Things going sideways.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, this is life and technology. So
Okay.
we all understand.
So I will
But
try to-
we're hearing you very clear, very strong. So this is a viable option if you want to talk things through.
And I was just getting to the slide where I needed to point out what was going on.
Okay.
So
We could give
check your
you,
email and see if that PowerPoint ever came through to you. But anyway, on the one side, I had the Rotarian standing in front of the nice, correct VIP latrine built with solid brick walls and a roof and a ventilation pipe in the back and a full door, using all the principles of you want air to come in with restrictions so it can only leave down the hole and up the ventilation pipe to pull all these smells and stuff out so that it's nice and clean and locked up. And on the other side, next to a church, you see the ventilation pipe that somebody built, obviously did the slab and ventilation pipe. And then the church people only built two sides of a block wall around it, and didn't put on the roof and didn't put on the rest of the sides.
okay.
What's going on?
So you know what, Dawn?
Yeah?
I pulled up your PowerPoint.
Okay.
So I could share my screen and get to that slide.
Sure, it's the slide that says which is better, and it's about slide 9.
Okay, let me go ahead and share the screen. Okay. I see it here. Let me open it up. Slideshow. All right, and then we are looking at slide 9, you said, right?
Yeah.
So
you see on the left, there's the very small.
Should I go back
building
or forward? Okay, I see.
And the guy standing next to it. And on the right, it's just a block wall. You can't really see it, but there's only 2 walls. The pipe is sticking up.
Yeah.
There's a pair of pants over the top of the wall. There's no roof.
Right.
And the question is, which is better? Well, if you're working on scientific logic and you understand how ventilated improved pit latrines are designed, you would say the one on the left. It's complete. There's rain protection so water's not falling down the hole. There's the ventilation pipe and the whole scientific design of how this thing is supposed to pull air down the hole and up the pipe so that there's not so bad as smells and things. Well, in visible logic, that still has holes, and it still has a bad smell. It gets very hot, and people who are used to, if I feel like, if I can smell it, and if it's hot and stuffy and miserable, that must not be a healthy environment, because if we've ever had a basement with black mold in it, and you walk into the storeroom and you smell the mold, even you Westerners say that's a bad idea. The smell tells you there's a problem. So the one on the right, if you count the number of blocks, the block wall on the right with no roof is actually almost as high as the ventilated improved latrine on the left. So it screens that whole church. Wild as it seems, the whole church can't really see in, so you've got your privacy. You've got natural airflow carrying away the smells. All the poop falls down the hole anyway, so people are like, if the mason put a little bit of slope to the slab so that rainwater just rolls off to the side, and they don't see that it still infiltrates down into the pit, they're like, well, the one with the way we did on the left is an improvement over the way we did it on the right. And so you may or may not agree, but you better respect that logic in communities, or you will mostly see latrines like the one on the right. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to put my computer on slideshow so that I can see it the way you see it.
Okay.
It says skepticism has been earned. If you click, there have been plenty of foreigners pushing the thing that'll save Haiti, touting scientific proof, and the thing promptly fails, and it wastes the users rare time, money, and other resources because the foreigners forgot to factor something in, and now it's the person with very little disposable resources of time and money who literally pays the price. So Haitians are skeptical for a reason about the scientific proof behind things. If you click again, it says the plural of community anecdote is not data, but it can have just as much influence. People's stories of what works and not, and their perception of how those stories inform and are related to what you're proposing will really have an influence on how much you got to work in order to convince them that what you would like them to do really will work the way you say it will work. Because it's also true that the plural of I did lab tests is also not necessarily data. And Haitians have seen that in real life application time and time again. So if you tell people that their stories and anecdotes are not data and you have the scientific solution, just the fact that you did lab tests and have a scientific paper saying it works does not mean it will actually work for them. And again, we have to be humble in our use of science. If you go to the next slide and it says back to who picks the problem,
right?
As our trusty Rotarians are standing there discussing the latrine on the right, click again and it says Haitian families are pressed to pay rent, food, and schooling. They don't have much margin. Landlords want their rent. If you click again, it says even if they agree with you, the opportunity cost of latrines over just pooping in the cemetery might be too high for them. Pooping in the cemetery is a bad option, but at least it's an option. Schools and landlords demand hard cash, and that's the first place families have to put their money. And so if you want them to do a latrine, you have to take that into account because they are up against some very hard realities that are beyond water and sanitation. They've got to make their whole life work, especially if they don't want to send kids into Restavec because the cash for sending them to school had to be put somewhere else. So you better have thought through with them what you're asking them to do. Also, like the latrine on the left, secure storage of income producing goods like the motorcycle that you use as a moto taxi may trump the need for sanitation. If your moto taxi that you earn a living with gets stolen, you have no income. So there's actually a reason that latrine on the left was built very small, because if you want it to be a latrine and not a locked storage yard, sometimes that's what you got to do. Because it matters to a family that they can keep their moto taxi secure at night without bringing it in where a hot muffler is going to be jammed up against a bed, which is flammable and burn the whole house down. And I've seen things like that happen.
Wow.
So that's why the moto goes in the latrine. It's not flammable, usually. So you click again to the slide that says, what's an extensionist to do?
Okay.
And then click again. It's essential that when we do our grant budgets and tell donors how long it's going to take us to do a program and how much time we need, you have to budget time and staff salary and staff time to have these long conversations with people about what you'd like them to do, how it fits into their life, and have time to discuss all these different things, which they may not jump into as fast as you because they're not feeling the time pressure of the donor over your shoulder that's paying for your salary to even be there. People aren't going to modify paradigms on your schedule. They modify them when it makes sense for them. And you've just got to explain to donors and bosses and whatever, it's going to take us time to get this set up. If you click again, you have to provide people with options, multiple options, so they can pick the one that fits with their life the best. And you may have to screen for people who are interested in the options you can provide and tell the rest, you're very right. That's a very sensible way to go about it. That's just not something I can help you with. Maybe I can connect you with somebody. If you click again, herd immunity in sanitation is wonderful until you try and shove it down someone's throat by trying to compel them. You have to work with the willing and keep talking with the hesitant. There was a practice that started in Bangladesh that was called total sanitation, where you basically sent extensionists in your community and tried to shame people into doing latrines. They actually in 2014 or 15 brought that to our area, the Croix Rouge Francais. With much trepidation, we could tell that they didn't even like the idea. Came in and showed us the manuals and said, this is kind of the thing that is working that some UN agency wanted us to do. And I had to make the presentation to my public health and sanitation extensionists, and they all looked at each other and we said, we can't do this in Haiti. We will be lynched. We will be run out of town on a rail. If we insult people like this as outsiders to this community, they're going to react and it won't be good for us. There's no way we're doing this in Haiti. I think they've modified it since because they finally realized what works in Bangladesh does not work in other countries. But that was like, people, please. And finally, extensionists have to look for new opportunities. There was a point where the National Water Board, DNEPA, declared that everybody, no one was allowed to subsidize a family latrine. You couldn't help pay people for the physical stuff. People just had to get used to a latrine is as much a part of a house as a roof, and they're responsible for it. You can give them technical advice. You can help them with lending them forms to pour the concrete. You can do all kinds of stuff, but you can't give them a latrine. And what that did was it pushed us to not doing family latrines, but working with schools to build school latrines. Well, there, what you're doing is you're getting the kids used from almost toddlerhood to washing their hands and connecting the germ theory in class with how they go to the bathroom in school. And people realize if you've got 200 little kids all together that they can't all go running out in the bush every day. And the culture change actually can start there. So that was actually not so bad of a switch for us who could only do, as a Rotary Club or even as HAS, could only do a few latrines a year. If you click again, what time is it? Because this slide is, if we still have time, I can talk a bit about water.
10:26.
Okay, you need me to finish at 10:30?
Not exactly. I mean, you could go a little bit beyond it.
Okay. Well, for water, talk about 1,000 ways to skin a problem. Mostly, I'll just refer you back to Peter Wampler's talk. I think it was episode 10 of the first season, because he got into much of the same stuff. I was helping him with a lot of his work on filtration and taking biosand filter tech theory and applying it to adapting home wells to still be somebody's home well, but be a little more self-filtering. And that's a good for people to go to YouTube and find that episode and listen to it, because Peter would go through a lot of the same stuff that I could say. If you click again, the second thing under if there's time water is options squared. Patients are not a monolith. They live in all different kinds of situations. They have all different kinds of preferences. And often the best thing we could do as water extensionists was just to give them various different options for how you can go about getting pure water, depending on were they on the top of the mountain with no water, or were they down in a rice field where there was plenty of groundwater and it was all contaminated with fertilizer, or whether they had a little bit of money, or whether they needed the absolute cheapest thing they could do, whether it was a family of healthy people or a family of vulnerable people. The more options we could give people and let them pick what worked for them, the better off we were. If you click again, the options include chlorine approaches galore. And if you want an argument, get US versus European development people to discuss how much chlorine, how many parts per million of chlorine should be in water for protective. The US has a very different approach to the Europeans, and the Europeans would sit there and call the American people nuts because we put so much chlorine in. And the Haitians would be sitting back listening to this saying, we think you're all nuts. Chlorine is a poison and it tastes awful, and we've got other options, and we don't get sick if we use the other options. So we don't want either of them. Chlorination of water has a horribly low adoption rate in Haiti because people just didn't grow up drinking chlorinated water and thinking it was a good idea, and it tastes awful. Charcoal filters, which have their own problems, if you let them go too long, they become breeding grounds and they add rather than subtract pathogens. There's pottery filters, there's colloidal silver based filters, there's reverse osmosis, which actually took off like gangbusters in Haiti because it was something you bought. You carried water home in a 5-gallon Culligan bottle. It was something the Europeans used. So then the bourgeois started using it and it became the thing to do. And people kind of knew who was running it. So even though WHO said if people don't change the filters in those, it's not good water. So WHO doesn't recognize reverse osmosis microbusiness as being officially improved water, but it's very popular in Haiti. And then you got biosand filters. You've got, do you put the filter on the whole spring system, or do you just have people filter the water at the household level? There's all kinds of options. And you just, like in the States, you put them all out there and let people pick from the menu sometimes. And about WHO standards, it's good to meet WHO standards. They are worried about treated water becoming reinfected and not being good. So WHO standard wants to have less than 1 colony forming unit of coliform bacteria per 100 milliliters when you test it. And that's nice. The problem is it's a limited group of technologies and chlorine that will get you there, and a lot of them don't work in rural Haiti. But there's the concept of a sub-infectious dose where, I mean, in cholera, if you get 10 cysts in 100 milliliters of water and people drink it, they're probably going to get sick. But for most other things, for the things that don't easily filter out like cholera cysts, people can tolerate 10 or 20 infectious units per 100 mil, and their immune systems will fight it off, and it's something called a sub-infectious dose. And we found that, as Peter remarks in his talk, that if we accepted a level of 10 colony forming units instead of the WHO standard of 1, we could open up the options for people, and we could still see marked reductions in infection rates and people getting sick. And they would actually use those technologies that fell between 1 and 10 CFU testing. So they would actually use much improved water when they might give up on the technology or not be able to afford the technology that gave them the best water. And in the end, we did better with the very good instead of going for the best standard. And sometimes that's what you've got to do if that's what works for people. And then the last click on that page is you got to be there for maintenance for water. How many of you attendees are plumbers and engineers and accountants and conflict negotiators? But especially for like a chlorinator put on a community water system or just running a community water system in Haiti, whoever's running it has to be all of those. They have to understand how to fix the pipes. They have to understand when there's an engineering problem. They've got to manage the accounts of who owes what, and there will be conflict over use of water when somebody wants to use more than their share or doesn't want to have to pay the rate or whatever, and you've got to be able to negotiate that. And very few Americans can ever do that. So these community water groups, or if it's a well or a spring capping or whatever it is, certainly with filters even, you got to be there to help them with maintenance. A lot of the filters, maybe once every 6 months, you've got to declog them. Well, how many Americans who get some new device will go 6 months and then it needs some maintenance, and the American forgets how to do the maintenance? It happens all the time. And then you pick up the phone and you call the helpline, or you call the Roto-Rooter, or you call Herman Services to come service your AC every year because you forget what you're supposed to do, even if it's something you could do. Well, there's got to be a maintenance system. So a lot of what HAS did, we had techs that just went around and did maintenance. And there's a group called, there's a group south of San Marc that just does water filters, and much of what they do, I think it's Pure Water for Haiti, much of what they do is they basically say, we'll give you a service. Yes, we'll put a filter in your house because that's the tool, but part of the service that you'll pay a little bit for each month is that we will come and regularly do the declogging and the checking and making sure that it's flowing correctly. And we'll handle all of that, so you don't have to. All you do is give us a little money each month and we make sure you have water. And just like in the US, the way American people get water, that seems to work well. So you can click again, merci en pile, au revoir et prudence. And that's basically the message I'm sent to tell you.
So merci en pile, interpret.
Okay.
What is merci en pile?
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay, okay.
Sometimes I'm so Haitian, I forget that people haven't heard that version of it.
Yes.
Merci beaucoup is the French, which most people do understand, but sometimes I forget the Creole is not always just a slide into French.
Okay. Are you able to get back on now?
It's very spotty.
Okay. So does anybody have, thank you so very much. I mean, I never in my wildest dreams could have thought that talking about latrines was so multi-layered and so like insightful about a lot of things that are very important. Like, how do you interact, the interaction between science and a community? As community developers, how, with your, enthusiasm and great ideas, how do you go into a community? And there are two things that I put down, and top is humility. Humility. Like, yeah. And then of course, the fact that what may seem simple is actually complex and multi-layered. So I invite others to make comments and ask questions. This was a very insightful. I like the fact that you took this approach instead of giving us scientific data, is how do you actually interact with a community effectively? Because this could be used in multiple, not just people dealing with environmental issues, almost everything that a person wants to do in a community could draw principles and lessons from what you just laid out for us. Trevor?
Yes, so I have a question for Dawn.
Okay.
There is a principle called the homeostatic principle, where people who are used to doing a certain thing, even if that thing is not good, if it's dysfunctional, they grow familiar with it and are comfortable with it. And so any attempt to bring about changes from the outside will cause a pushback from them. Just like there's some dysfunctional families that have grown accustomed to their dysfunctionality. And so when a counselor comes in to make changes, there's a reaction from that family because they have grown comfortable with the dysfunctionality. So the question is, how does one bring about lasting changes in these kinds of communities where some of the practices that they're engaging in obviously are detrimental to their health and the welfare of their community? How do we engage them in a way that they can see the need for lasting changes that would improve the quality of life in their community?
As I said, you have to spend time kind of dwelling with them where they are. And a lot of people who are in these dysfunctional setups, I mean, you can imagine, in a dysfunctional family, what kind of stress and trouble people are trying to avoid by sticking with a routine that seems to avoid the explosions. A Haitian family that is barely getting by, they're they're on the verge of, one more thing hitting them, and the country's always throwing things at them to hit them, is just going to push them over the edge and they'll starve or lose their house or whatever. Those are very real stressors, and they may be reluctant to make a change because they have no margin for anything else to go wrong if it doesn't work, which is why so many people in poor, developing, we really think they ought to have something better environments are so reluctant to change, is because the risk cost of change for them is very high. If you sit and dwell with them and talk things over, and they get to the point where they understand that, where they believe that you understand their problem and you're not going to throw them into turmoil because what you're touting doesn't take their needs into account, their full set of needs. And you help them talk through and think through what is this going to fix for me, and how do I manage its risks? Then you slow down the sense of change and help them to master it so that they can emotionally buy in and say, yes, I now believe there's less risk to doing this than to not doing this, and that it's something that will actually work. And there's really no exception for spending time and having understanding. And it's one reason why at HAS and now in Restavek Freedom, all of our extensionists are Haitians, and we prefer local people with lived experience, either lived experience as Restaveks and Restavek Freedom, or lived experience in those communities at HAS, not just people from Port-au-Prince with a university degree, because they're the folks who got it. They're the folks who understood people's mindsets because they had enough experience with it to understand where those mindsets came from. And also people looked at them and said, I know you've dealt with this problem yourself. It's not a theory for you. You weren't sitting up in Petchenville behind high walls with razor wire getting all your water from your own cistern. You've had to deal with angry neighbors breaking pipes as well. And that's always been the most useful way, the most effective way I've seen in approaching that question.
Okay. I know people have to leave and stuff now, but this is a really good presentation and conversation that needs a lot more people to get involved with it, because many of us on here are actually trying to do community development, whether it's in health, in education, on and on. And the principles that you laid out and you are laying out is essential, because we can't just think we could just go into somebody's community and just tell them what to do as if we have all the answers. And so that's my takeaway from this, is the humility and understanding complexity, that quote unquote, what might look simple to us because we have scientific data or whatever, is not the case.
And a lot of people will say that, and a lot of professors will teach that to their students. But there's a gap between saying it in theory and seeing how that plays out in practice. And I hope some of, at least the slides that I put up and some of the discussions showed the dynamic of how that works.
Yep, you did a very good job of showing that. Yep. Well, okay. we have to bring it to a close. Trevor, you had something else?
Yeah, I wanted to just add to what Dawn said by suggesting that every community have what we call the change makers or the influential people in that community, so that one of the important things that need to be done is you need to connect with those people in that community, because they have a very great influence on the rest of the communities. In other words, if we can draw them in or buy them into what we are trying to do, they in turn will carry the message to the rest of the community. And it will seem as if the idea is not coming from us, but actually from them. And it will be received a little bit better because it's not simply coming from a foreigner, but coming from one of their own people. But the importance of connecting with the change makers, the influential people in the community who bring about changes is very important.
Mm-hmm. And Gloria, you had something you wanted to ask or say?
Yeah, something that I think was significant is that sometimes there's a principle that the best can be the enemy of the good.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we're trying to reach perfection and we fail completely. Whereas if you just aim at something that will be good enough, it might be the best thing, at least for the immediate.
Yep.
So, for example, trying to
or
the lower level rather than the WHO level.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can mitigate the difference between the best and the good enough and help people identify when to use it. Like we would tell people, if you've got a frail older person or a young child that needs, if you've got to feed them baby formula, boil that water. Make sure that gets down to absolutely no infectious material.
Mm-hmm.
But that's only a small subset of what you need. For washing your dishes and for the rest of you, 10's fine. You don't have to spend money and time getting lots of firewood. Just get a little bit for the people who absolutely have to have pure water. And the rest of you, a filter is fine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that answered their concern over, but the public health person tells me the water has to be this pure, and my baby and my grandma, and I can't afford all the firewood, and what do I do? Okay, we'll blend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And dwell with people in the life that they have and help them find what combination of options works for them. And it's got to work for them before it works for the WHO.
Right.
But you can't ignore the WHO because there's a reason they said what they said.
Right.
And it's that dynamic of finding solutions together that ultimately gets people testing a change and adopting that change and making it part of their life.
Mm-hmm.
I also wanted to say that I was a student at Andrews on the first Earth Day, and there was a part of the group that established the arboretum, and we planted a tree for Earth Day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the
very
small
first screen,
steps.
or what?
Small.
I didn't quite catch.
I think she was saying that she was one of the first ones that planted a tree, and that began the Arboretum.
First Earth Day. That was the first.
Earth Day. The first Earth Day. Okay.
At Andrews.
At Andrews. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, very good, Dawn. You need to have classes in this thing. I mean, for real, because it cuts across many different sectors for people who are trying to make change in their community. And because you get frustrated, like, oh, we have this great idea. Why are they not seeing it? Well, they need to listen to what you said here today. And so we want to thank you so very much. Even despite the technical difficulties, it was a great presentation.
It was a very Haitian presentation, and this
Good.
kind of do it over the phone to the end. This is so classically Haitian.
Right,
there.
Right. So it's very appropriate, yes.
Yeah. And it works.
Yes, it worked, yep. All right, thank you so very much, everyone, again, for tuning into our Environmental Fridays. Have a good day, take care.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Be sure to visit our website at www.theenvironmentalfridays.com.